So to go on about the story about how employees, maybe somebody who knows that they're doing something wrong and they're part of that team dynamic, it really ties into the book of Jonah and Jonah's story. And so we're going to dive in a little bit more into how the story applies in real life and the things that we're seeing when it comes to team dynamics and a team member that doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So in the book of Jonah, God tells Jonah that he needs to go to Nineveh and start warning them that they are going to be in trouble if they don't start following God's law. Okay? And so Jonah decides that he's not going to do what God says. And so he actually goes and gets on a ship and buys, voyage to go with them. And once he's on there, the seas start raging. And so I'm gonna read the Message version again, just because I think it kind of gives a more realistic view of what happens in a more today's time sound. But when the storm starts, it says, "But God sent a huge storm at sea, the waves towering. The ship was about to break into pieces. The sailors were terrified. They called out in desperation to their gods. They threw everything they were carrying overboard to lighten the ship." So this is the first thing that they do to try to fix the problem, okay? Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the hold of the ship to take a nap. He was sound asleep. The captain came to him and said, "What's this? Sleeping? Get up. Pray to your God. Maybe your God will see you're in trouble and rescue us." So now Jonah's not doing what God says. And then in the midst of the storm, what does he do? He sleeps. And I can't tell you how many times in a team dynamic when that person that's decided that they're not going to do their part of the job, when I tell you that they have no worry over the fact that the other people are not getting what they need, they generally speaking are very confident in what they're doing and what they're choosing to do. And some may have an attitude about the situation, some may have just this nonchalance, some may not even recognize that they're necessarily doing it, but they're not doing it. And everybody around them is dealing with the repercussions of whatever that person's actions are. So that's the first thing that happens. And then the sailors said to one another, "Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's draw straws to identify the culprit on the ship. Who's responsible for this disaster?" So they drew straws, and Jonah got the short straw. And they grilled him. "Confess. Why this disaster? What is your work? Where do you come from? What country? What family?" And he told them, "I am a Hebrew. I worship God, the God of heaven who made the sea and the land." At that, the men were frightened, really frightened, and said, "What on earth have you done?" As Jonah talked, the sailors realized that he was running away from God. So he openly admits that he's doing wrong. Okay, and they said to him, "What are we going to do with you to get rid of this storm?" By this time, the sea was wild and totally out of control. And Jonah tells them, Jonah says, "Throw me overboard into the sea, then the storm will stop. It's all my fault. I'm the cause of the storm. Get rid of me and you'll get rid of the storm." And so I can't tell you how many times I've had an employee say, "No, I told them I wasn't going to do that. I don't think that should be my job," or "I don't think that this," or "I don't think that." And they'll openly admit oftentimes the things that they're not going to do. Or maybe it's that they're not going to help a specific person or something like that. And maybe you're the person in charge and you know that they're not helping that person, and you kind of go to them and you're like, you need to stop doing that. And they're like, "No, I mean, I'm not helping her, I'm not helping him," or whatever. And so these people will just openly talk about these things, especially if it's somebody who's pretty confident that they're not going to do those things. And the other people around them are catering, so they're not telling on them, so they're getting away with it, and they're going to continue with that behavior because they're getting away with it. Okay, so Jonah tells them that to throw them overboard, but the sailors don't. They said, "But no." The men tried rowing back to shore. They made no headway. The storm only got worse and worse and wild and raging. Okay? Then they prayed to God, "Oh God, don't let us drown because of this man's life, and don't blame us for his death. You are God. Do what you think is best." And so at this point, so now They've thrown off all of their other things. They've been praying to different gods. They even go and confront Jonah and say, why are you sleeping? What are you doing? And he tells them, throw me overboard. They still don't throw me overboard. Okay, so if you think about those employees that are threatened, go tell your boss. Go tell them. And still the sailors don't throw him overboard. And finally, okay, they even don't want to be blamed. So they don't want to take the, kind of the snitches get stitches mentality. So they don't want to take the blame for the fall of that person, even though like in this particular event, Jonah is the reason why the storms are raging. It is really all Jonah's fault, okay? And still they're afraid that they're going to take some type of blame for Jonah, not only for the problem, but for Jonah's quote unquote death. Like they think they're going to throw him over to die. And so they don't want to take blame. And so they finally take Jonah and throw him overboard. And immediately the sea is quieted down. And I think about the times that people finally, like, they're at their peak, the people dealing with the employee that doesn't do their job, and they're just at their wits' end, and they finally come, and some brave soul comes and speaks up on the behalf of everybody. And finally, the person is dealt with, and things get calm for a second. And they finally get that peace that they were looking for that whole time. But as a leader, sometimes when people come to me and they tell me these things, my initial reaction is kind of like, why do you wait for so long to say something? Okay, now I have to like when you're trying to maybe coach somebody or get them to improve, or maybe even have them be let go, right? You have to follow this process. And so now I'm just starting this process. When it was a continued process, I could have gotten them gone long before then. And the other thing that happens during this time is other people, maybe even good high performers, okay, they will feel like nothing is changing, and they will leave because of an employee not being dealt with. But they will leave before they even address that employee being dealt with, because people often believe that you should know who it is. You should know that these things are happening. You should know that they're going on. And so there's a lot of consequences of not dealing with these types of employees. But there's not a lot that you can do if you're really truly not aware. And so when they finally come to me and I think about, and oftentimes I'll be like, and so left because of them, and this and this, and so you're getting all this information. It feels like information overload, and you're like, why did you wait so long? Why didn't you address this sooner? I could have helped you a long time ago. And we often get so caught up in the why that it doesn't matter at that point. And if it really is truly human nature, if we've seen this from the beginning of time, that people don't necessarily want to address those things, then we don't need to dwell on that. We don't need to carry that with us or think about what ifs. We can what if anything to death. We really just need to make sure that we're taking action and that we're doing the right thing to quiet the seas. Very similar to what happens when they eventually throw Jonah overboard. Okay, so then they throw Jonah overboard, and a huge fish swallows Jonah. Okay, and he goes and he's in this belly of this fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, so he gets to Nineveh, and this is another just an added bonus to Jonah's story when it comes to leadership principles. So Jonah gets to Nineveh, and he goes and he does exactly what God tells him to do. But the people of Nineveh are really bad, and so he's over there preaching to them about turning from their ways, aligning with God, and they listen to him. Okay, so at this point, Jonah's now the employee that's doing. He's course corrected, right? So you've gone and you've made those corrections, and he's fixing everything, right? And so oftentimes what we see happen when an employee is starting to fix things is that they begin to notice the faults in other people, okay? And they don't necessarily always align. And this could be any employee, honestly. Like, they're coming to you and telling you that they did something wrong, and then whoever it might be goes and fixes it. And when I say fix it, I mean addresses the issue. But sometimes people don't address the issues in the way that they think you should address the issue. So, for example, they may have perceived that the person should have been let go, and you are of the mindset that everyone is coachable and I'm going to coach them for improvement. And so in this particular example, all right, Jonah goes and does a great job of turning these people around, and God forgives them. Okay, he says they do what they're supposed to do, and God forgives them, and Jonah is mad. He is like, what? You're not going to do anything to them? You're not going to punish them? You're just going to forgive them? And so we get to this part where Jonah's furious. He lost his temper. He yelled at God and said, God, I knew it. When I was back home, I knew this was going to happen. That's why I ran off to Tarshish. I knew you were I knew you were sheer grace and mercy, not easily angered, rich in love, and ready at the drop of a hat to turn your plans of punishment into a program of forgiveness. So God, you won't kill them? Kill me. I'm better off dead. And God does something that I think that I often talk. I did a couple of talks about coaching this week at work, and specifically with a group of charge nurses, which, we sometimes when somebody is like a lead or has some level of authority but not full authority, it's such a hard place to be in. And so in this particular example, that's what Jonah is. Jonah has a somewhat of a level of authority. I mean, he is speaking directly to God, but he really has no real authority because God is God. Okay, so he's yelling at him, and he's obviously super mad at his decision making. And so what does God do? Does God tell him, Jonah, shut up, I had to take you out of a fit, get you to fall into a fish to get you to do your job? No, he doesn't say anything about everything that Jonah had been through. So he's really the person who's showing, grace and mercy in that situation. He really is the God that Jonah is telling him that he is. And, it is okay to be a leader in that same capacity. And I think that God does a great example of showing the difference between accountability and, forgiveness and grace and those kinds of things. So God does what I try to tell people to do more of, and that is he asks questions. And so eventually one day I'll do like a lesson on coaching, but for this particular example, he asks the question and he says, what do you have to be angry about? And the response to that is like super magical, right? Because Jonah's just this, really professional person, right? No, he's not. And so he leaves. He just goes and pouts like a baby. He goes and sulks. He leaves the city. He goes out there. He makes himself a shelter in the woods and basically stays out there. And what does God do? And it's, it's hot. It's all these things, right? So God grows a tree with a big leaf in order to give him some shade. Okay, he gives him a reprieve, and it helps Jonah cool off and allows him to be out there with himself and sulk. And Jonah was very happy and very pleased with the shade. And so then God teaches him a lesson and sends out a worm to eat the plant that had given him shade. Okay, and it ate the shade, and it withered away, and the sun came up, and God sent a hot, blistering wind, and it beat down on Jonah's head so much that he started to faint, and he prayed to die. Okay, so he says again, the woe is me, right? So I'm over there pouting, and he says, what's this? God tells him, so he asks another question. What's this? How is it that you can change your feelings from pleasure to anger overnight about the mere shade tree that you did nothing to get? Okay, So he just continues to ask him questions that help him think about what it is he's doing. And so I tell people all the time when they're coaching to let people come to their own conclusions. And it's okay if they have certain feelings about the situation. That is completely acceptable. That is part of how change happens. If you never got upset about something that made you change your behavior, then you likely wouldn't change that behavior, right? And so maybe not even upset, but maybe if you were super happy, maybe you got a really good result. All of those emotions, whether it's good or bad, help you make the changes that you need to make. So God lets him feel his emotions, and then he just starts asking him questions. How did this make you feel? How do you feel that plant grew and you were so happy and then it was gone overnight? You neither planted it nor watered it. It grew up one night and died the next night. So why can't I likewise change what I feel about Nineveh from anger to pleasure? And so he gives him this emotional, intelligent answer, right? He not only gives him the experience, and of course he's God, so he can do that. As leaders, we can't always recreate an experience, but what he teaches him is to show the difference, how emotions work, and how one person might feel something and how another person might feel something, and make it something that is relatable. And so he says, so why can't I likewise change what I feel about Nineveh from anger to pleasure? This big city of more than 120,000 childlike people who don't yet know right from wrong, to say nothing of all the innocent animals. And so at this point, and that's where the story ends, okay? There's no long lecture. There's no even really knowing if Jonah changes his mind or he continues to sulk. And so at the end of the day, I think that is very telling for most employees too. You never know how an employee is going to respond. One might be open to hearing you and hearing what you're having to offer and really come to the conclusion that maybe they need to be a little bit different. Or, maybe they stick to their guns, and maybe Jonah died out there in the woods. I have no idea, right? It does not tell us. And so I think at the end of the day, when you are out there trying to lead these people, you're remembering that you're really leading them for the better. And so if you can remember just general things, and again, one of the reasons why Light Beneath My Feet Consulting is present is because there's so many different examples of how leadership and the way that we handle things is already written here in the Bible. And so when we deal with people and we get those employees who don't do their job, or get those employees upset about how we do our jobs as leaders, both of those examples can be handled still with genuineness and compassion and understanding from both sides. So I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed Jonah's examples of everyday work in the workplace.